In today's lesson, we're going to remind ourselves of algebraic notation. That's the correct way of writing algebraic expressions. There are 4 different types of notation that you need to recognise, and I'm going to go through 4 examples of each of them during this lesson. The first type is when you're adding or subtracting terms together, so we want to collect them all up. In part A, it asks us to work out A plus A plus A plus A plus A. To do this, you simply write down how many A's there are in total. That's because we're adding them together. So that's 5A in total. In part B, we can do the same thing, but this time we've got some which have already been grouped together. So if I have 4B and I add another 2B, that gives me 6B in total. In part C, I have 3C and I'm adding another C to it. Remember that a C by itself means 1C, and collecting them up gives me an answer of 4C. In my last example, I have 7D, and this time I'm subtracting 2Ds. Therefore 7 take away 2 gives me 5D left over at the very end. The second type of notation that you need to recognise is when we multiply terms together. In algebra, we don't like to show times signs, so when we multiply things we simply stick them together. But what's really important is you remember, if there's a number, you always put it at the front of your expression. So in this first example, A times 5, I simply want to remove the times sign, but because there's a number I need to make sure it goes at the front. So instead of A5, I'd write this as 5A. In my second example, simply remove the times sign, and because the number's already at the front, that gives me 4B. In part C, I remove all of the times signs, and that therefore gives me A, B, C, and that would be my answer. And lastly, in part D, I've got a 2, which is a number that needs to go at the front, and then all of the other parts get stuck together, so that's A, C, D. The third type of notation you need to know is when we multiply terms which are the same. When you do this, you end up with a power. So to show you this, if I have A times by A, remember this is not the same as A add A, I would end up with a power, and I could say that that's A squared, so A with a little 2. The little 2 indicates the fact that there's 2 A's which are being multiplied together. In the second example, I've got B times B times B times B, and because there's 4 of them, I can therefore say it's B to the power of 4. This works exactly the same way when there are several different letters which are all being multiplied together. So in part C, we have A times A times C times C times C. I know that there's 2 A's which are being multiplied together, which gives me A squared, and I'm going to stick that together with 3 C's, so that's going to be C cubed at the end. It's really important that your power goes with the correct letter. In this last example, I have 1 C and 4 D's which are being all multiplied together, so that's going to be C on its own and then D to the power of 4 at the end. The last type of notation that you need to recognise is when we're dividing terms. A division is simply another way of representing a fraction. The first number is the number that goes on the top, which is your numerator, and the number you're dividing by at the end is the denominator, the number at the bottom of your fraction. That means in part A, I can write A divided by B as A over B as a fraction like that. In the second example, B divided by A, it looks very similar, but this time I need to make sure B is on the top and A is on the bottom. It works exactly the same with numbers, so in part C, C divided by 3 would just be C on the top and 3 on the bottom of my fraction, and for part D, which is 7 divided by D, 7 goes on the top and D goes on the bottom, so they would be my answers. So your task for today is to write all 20 of the expressions at the bottom of the page using the correct algebraic notation. You'll know if you've got each answer correct because once you've got it, you should be able to find it and cross it from the grid that's at the top. So for example, the first one, which is b divided by a, I can write as b over a, and I can then cross it from the grid. You should only cross one answer off at a time. If there's a repeated expression in your grid, you'll need that answer to come up several times in order to cross all of them off. Once you've done this for all 20 of the questions that are at the bottom of the page, you should have 5 expressions left over. You need to write down all 5 of these expressions. You should notice that there's a pattern between the 5 answers that you have left over, and all you need to do is write down the missing term to this pattern. Once you've finished the task, simply take a photo of your work and upload it to Show My Homework so I can see how you've got on. If you are struggling to complete some of the work from today's lesson, then please do not hesitate to get in touch via comment on Show My Homework. I'll try to make myself as available as possible and get a reply to you as quickly as I can. If the issue requires a little bit more input from myself, I might ask to arrange a time to meet on Teams where I can give you some personalised help with that specific problem.